What is the just right challenge for a PDA child or teen, or meeting the child where they are when we're talking about PDA as a nervous system disability? So today, to kick off our Coffee with Casey, I want to tell a story about my son learning to access writing and drawing again after burnout, and the lenses that we as parents, therapists, doctors bring to understanding our children's paradoxical and sometimes frustrating behavior. And then we'll have a couple minutes for Q&A like we always do. I've set my Fitbit timer because I am going to go to yoga today, so we have about 25 minutes together. So welcome everybody. I'm so happy to see you. So we're talking about the just right challenge and how this can actually be wielded against our children or misunderstood. Okay, so let's start with a story. When my son was in burnout, which was about 4 years ago, one of the things that shifted was that he wouldn't write or draw at all. So he had learned to write his name when he was 2.5. And he used to draw things and increasingly just stopped drawing and writing when he moved into burnout. And of course, we were worried as parents. We had never heard of PDA. We were working through the sensory processing lens. So we were taking him to occupational therapy where we would do a bunch of sensory intense input. We would do hammock swings, all the fun stuff in order to regulate his nervous system so that he could then sit and write, because we were assuming that both he needed regulation, which was correct, but also that he needed to practice the skills of writing and drawing because it was a gross motor or fine motor issue. Fine motor issue. So the more we did this, unfortunately, the more he resisted writing and drawing, which I'm sure you can generalize to your experience with many things in therapy with your PDA child or teen. So during his burnout period, he had stopped walking voluntarily. We had to carry him places. He had stopped really communicating verbally. It was mostly growling, hissing, screaming, lots of meltdowns, and his stickiest basic need was eating, so he was increasingly stopping eating. So we weren't worried or focused on is he writing his name or is he drawing? But as he started to we moved to Michigan from Washington, D.C. I quit my career and really just focused on caregiving with him. And so during this time period, as he was starting to move through burnout, and I had lowered screen time limits and really dropped demands and was starting to understand PDA, he was starting to ask us to draw things for him, like some of the things he was seeing on his iPad, like superheroes, right? He was watching kids' YouTube and seeing other people drawing superheroes, and that was his special interest. So he would ask us to draw things that he couldn't fully articulate, and most of the time, as a parent, it felt like a very stressful encounter because we would be trying to draw exactly what he was saying, but he couldn't fully articulate what he wanted, and then it was tons of correcting, crying, falling on the ground, yelling at us, sort of equalizing behavior as his nervous system was activated because whatever was in his head that he couldn't fully articulate, and we're not artists, was not coming out in the page. Okay, so we spent about 6 months doing this on a daily basis, where he would ask us to draw things and we would attempt to draw them and he would correct us, but we would come up with these superheroes that he was interested in. This is his special interest at the time, which was a conduit to engagement. So from the outside looking in, a typical therapist is going to say, you can't do it for them because you need to build the skills and the cognitive ability to ideate and then execute and practice the fine motor, okay? They might say, hey, you can scaffold them and meet them where they are by being there with them, and maybe you draw the outline, but then they have to color it in, or vice versa. And through that lens, you are meeting the child where they are. However, that is looking at it through the lens of physical skills and cognitive skills, which my son had. because he already knew how to draw and he already knew how to write. Okay? The difference was that he could not access those skills. Okay? He couldn't access them because he was in that red part of the brain, the survival brain, where he couldn't access his executive functioning. Okay, so in order to support him over the long term, we had to do it for him over and over and over again and allow him to control us and correct us. And then during this time period, he would sometimes, while he was on an iPad, draw some of his own stuff, or we would draw things and then he would correct us. Okay, so this was our process of meeting him where he was. But if we had been in a therapeutic setting, we would have been corrected as parents because he has the physical skills, but he needs to practice them. So I really want to talk about these two different lenses, and not to say one is wrong or one is right, but just that both of them can be used to meet the child where they are, but we need to understand which lens applies to our kids, okay? So let's say we have two pairs of glasses. I have new glasses. So let's say this lens, the first lens, is like a blue tinted lens. And that is the dominant paradigm way of looking at things, which is like we need to build skills, we need to practice, we need to give them or scaffold their cognitive skills and practice them and push them through and get them used to it, right? So through that blue tinted lens, which is the more traditional, more behaviorally oriented lens, a therapist would say, hey, you can't do it for them. They need to practice, right? Which makes sense for some kids. However, let's say we have the tinted green lenses of PDA in the nervous system and survival brain and thinking brain, and we're understanding that actually this isn't about skills. Actually, his fine motor is fine when he's in his thinking brain. Actually, he has the executive functioning to execute his ideas when he's in that blue part of the brain. And so what becomes the scaffolding with this lens is actually doing it for them and allowing them to control you so that their cumulative nervous system comes down, activation comes down, and we're creating those neural pathways out of the survival brain back into the frontal lobe so they can access it, okay? So again, like neither of these lenses are right or wrong, but sometimes professionals or other parents will cling to the blue tinted lenses as like this is the only right way, and we want to give ourselves space to put on the green lenses and teach others to put on the green PDA and nervous system lenses, and also see that actually we're aligned. Like actually we both agree that we should meet the child where they are and engage in the just right challenge and scaffold. We just need to do it in different ways because we have two different root causes of the behavior. Okay, so now my son has no problem drawing and writing. It's a long-term process and it was very tedious and hard on our nervous systems until we could see it differently, like to just be controlled. But as soon as we saw it as like this is therapeutic, like this is the scaffolding, it became much more meaningful rather than that like voice in the back of your head of like, I need to fix this, I need to teach him, I need to make him do it. Okay, so I want to plant that seed and leave you with that story so that you can reflect on like what parts of your child's or teen's life is that blue lens of behavior and skill acquisition getting in the way of the scaffolding that your child actually needs, which is potentially lowering demands, doing it for them, giving your nervous system to them, allowing them to control you until they get back to a place of safety. And that might take months. Okay, so now we have plenty of time for questions. And I am going to scroll to the beginning and see how you guys are doing. Let's see. Feel free to drop in questions. My son stopped writing and drawing too. Yeah. And then of course, like we get anxious about it and we're like, we need to like make sure they keep practicing. And then it's perceived as like we're above them trying to make them do something, activates the fight flight response, leads to avoidance, right? So it can be this downward spiral. Hello, Sheila from Evanston, Illinois. I temporarily lived in Evanston for my freshman year of college because I actually went to Northwestern before I transferred back to University of Michigan. And my husband went to Evanston High School, so we've got connections to the Chicago area. My husband's from Chicago. Thank you for all you're doing and have stopped me from going mad. Yes, that's the goal. That's the goal, to not let people convince themselves that they're wrong or that their child is wrong, but that perhaps we just need to see it through a different lens and get aligned help and set boundaries with people who make us feel crazy. It's a long-term process. Catherine says growling here too. Yeah, so my son's one of his like fight responses is a hiss or a growl, right? And so that's sort of like a indicator of nervous system activation and your child externalizing it. So like internalized PDAers might not do those types of responses, but like if they have more of a fight flight and it's externalized, you're going to see those indicators. And yeah, my son still sometimes like hisses and growls at his brother. And it used to be the constant response whenever I spoke to him or interacted with him for like years. So I totally get it. It's no longer like that, thankfully. Good morning. Kelly says, good morning. Good morning, Casey. Can you please suggest how I can find a local group of families with PDA so I can find like-minded peers for my kiddo? So that's a great question. So I have a couple tips just from my own lived experience and other families I've worked with. So I actually found, I don't know if you guys have listened to my very first podcast before I even started the business, which is called PDA Parents, and I did it with another mom here in Michigan who has a PDA daughter my son's age, and we found each other because I posted on the Tilt Parenting Facebook group about my child being potentially PDA, and she responded, and then we met up. So we were about 20 minutes within each other's geographic area. Another way that I've found other families is through a knowledgeable OT practice. So if you know of a like trauma-informed or play-based practice or occupational therapy practice that's not ABA oriented, they may, if they have PDA awareness and permission from the parents, if you contact them, be able to connect you with other parents. And then, just in your daily life, I think one of the ways that we can create space to attract those that are more aligned and have kids like ours is to set boundaries and create space for families and potential friends and neurokin for our kids by not spending time with people who aren't affirming, right? So the very first step is pruning, right? Like taking stock of like, of course, if it's family or if it's a good friend, you want to like start with communication, nonviolent communication, but really taking stock and being objective about like who is draining my energy and who is draining my child's energy and who is making me feel unsafe, and do I need to not spend my time there? Because if we're orienting ourselves and our energy in lots of those spaces, then we don't have any energetic space for the people who are aligned to flow in. And I know that sounds a little woo-woo, but the more I set boundaries and prioritize the spaces, scenarios, and people that provide me energy and creativity and like humor and laughter and belonging, like the more space I have for more of that to come in. So those are some seeds I would plant with you. This makes a lot of sense after some evals we have done recently. I'm glad. Sounds so stressful. Yes, lots of things are stressful in this space. But if you can see it differently, then it becomes less stressful, right? Because like, one is like the tedium of like having a kid control you and having to draw when you're not a good drawer and everything you do is wrong. That is stressful to a degree. But the thing that's really stressing most of us out as parents is like not that actual interaction. It's the second part of it, which is like, I'm doing it wrong. I need to be correcting my kid. They shouldn't be doing it this way. If I allow them to do it this way or do it for them, they'll never learn. And then it becomes existential, right? And then you're like, shit, I'm doing it terribly. And it's like the second arrow. However, if we can see this existential of like, actually, this is exactly what my child needs. And actually, this is the scaffolding. And actually, this is the accommodation that over the long term gets their nervous system and resistance down to a level where maybe they'll engage, maybe not tomorrow, but like 6 months from now. This is the conduit back to their ability to engage in a skill that they already have. Then it's just this. It's not like this where I'm doing it wrong, I should be doing it different, all that resistance. It's just like, yeah, this is just like doing homework with a kid who's agitated, or like trying to teach a kid to ride a bike who's like having constant meltdowns or whatever it is. It's just like, yeah, it's tedious. You got to be regulated. You got to be patient. But if you can view it differently, it's not going to like drain that life energy out of you, because it has a purpose and a meaning, and you know that you're aligned and you know that you're helping your kid. And like, that's what I'm here to do, is to remind you of that, because everyone else is going to tell you you're doing it wrong, right? You're intuiting. I don't want to make my kid color and write when like maybe this is the first time they're talking to you voluntarily and they're showing interest, right? Like when my son was like, draw superheroes, I was like, thank the Lord he's interested in something other than just like me throwing stuffies at him, entertaining him, bothering his brother, and an iPad, right? And you got to view it like that, right? So like, it's like, oh, he's engaged in something. This is great. So it's like, we have to tune out those voices that are like, you're doing something wrong, and follow the intuition, which is like, you know that your kid, if you make them write or color when they're at their threshold, it's going to make it less likely that they do it the next time or in that moment. But the reason you don't do it for them isn't because you don't know that's what they need. It's because someone is telling you you're doing it wrong and making you feel like you're destroying your child, right? Like most of the time parents intuit this stuff because you're attuned and like you have a good head on your shoulders. I truly believe that. Like parents are not turkeys. I'm sorry. We're good people. And I'm trained as an academic in a discipline, so I also view things through lenses, right? Like I'm a trained political scientist. That's one way of viewing things. It views human behavior through rational choice, right? Mostly like white male decision-making based on econometrics. My advisor was a feminist scholar who studied power dynamics. That's a different lens. Is one of those right and wrong? No, they're just two different disciplinary lenses, and it's like the same thing is true for parenting. But because the dominant paradigm is like, you have to do it this way, you're made to feel like you're hurting your child. This is very helpful. My son does the exact same thing. Perspective is everything. Yes. What if my child is lying to us a lot? So I think one thing, like I'll just plant a seed because I don't know the context. So it's actually a common response. Okay, so there's different levels of behavior. Like if your child is activated, they're going to engage in what's called equalizing behavior, which is behavior that can feel controlling or distressing in order to get back to a place of nervous system safety. So it might happen after school. They've been masking all day and they walk in the door and they're starting to be mean to you. They're telling you things that aren't true. They're, like destroying their siblings' things or getting in their space right away. And they need that constant undivided attention. They're equalizing reflexively to get back to safety after they've been like accumulating stress all day, right? So that can look like lying, right? Or if you correct them, like, hey, I noticed you just walked over and like kicked William's train setup that he has worked on all weekend. And they turn to you and say, I didn't do it. And you're like, I just saw you with my own two eyes. But what's happening is when you're like, hey, don't do that, there's the perception that you're above them, which subconsciously activates the nervous system. It's neuroception, which is happening on a subconscious level. So the reflective behavior is lying or denying, right? And so to me, with a PDA kid, I believe that is an indicator of cumulative nervous system stress. So to reduce that reflexive behavior that comes from the red part of the brain, we actually focus in areas that have nothing to do with the moment or lying. It might mean lowering demands or, sorry, my buzzer is going off. Lowering demands, providing equality, providing autonomy in other areas of the day so that they don't get to the threshold where as soon as like you ask them a question or call them on something you know they did, that they lie. Does that make sense? It's like we so often view behaviors as like, what do we do when they're lying to stop the lying versus the lying is just the like indicator that the child has tipped past their threshold. Okay, so that's again like a different, those are your like green PDA glasses that you're putting on to view behavior differently. And this is a paradigm shift. Like this is why I call my signature program paradigm shift. And it doesn't happen overnight because it's relearning a way of viewing how humans operate, right? Which is like not something we're going to do overnight or without grief or without, you know, challenges along the way or falling back to our baseline conditioning of like, they like, you know, they have control of this. And so I'm going to use frontal lobe strategies to make it stop, right? So my buzzer went off, so I'm going to have to call it, you guys. Yes, Rodika, the lying is the symptom, treat the cause. The root cause is the accumulation of nervous system stress over time or in the moment when we're like correcting them. And often, I'll just plant the seed also, you might notice that they lie about things that don't seem to matter, right? Like, I remember my son or lie or like hold on to a belief that's not true, that you're like, why does this matter, right? It's like, you know, I remember with my mother-in-law, my son was reminiscing of when I had my younger son, William, that he stayed at her house overnight, whereas she actually came to our house to stay with him while we were in the hospital. And he was like, no, we were at your house. And she corrected him. And so he doubled down and it became this like fixation where he's like, no, we stayed at your house. And it feels like we need to correct that in the moment because it's like he needs to know what's true. But actually it has nothing to do with what's true. It just has to do with what his nervous system is doing, because if we're constantly correcting him and being like, we're the parents, we know, or I was there, so I know, his nervous system just activates to the point where like it's your willpower against his survival drive, and who's going to win? A human survival drive will always win against like consistency of parenting. Just saying. And you felt that because you're here, and I felt that too. Okay, my friends, I'm off to yoga to regulate my nervous system. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.